All right, guys, we have made it to our fireside chat. And I want each and every one of you who is here right now for this chat to give yourself a round of applause because you've made it. Round of applause. And please welcome Nicolas, Burkardt, CFO of Marvel Fusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe before I start off, a couple of words about the climate bricks, because Marvel Fusion, I'm now part of the company since 2.5 years. Before, I worked for air taxi companies in Europe, synthetic fuels, quantum computing, and it's quite amazing that there is now some kind of playbook that gives some guidance for the individual technologies to ultimately support founders to attract funding, to get in contact early on with politics, to create some momentum also in politics, to support companies to attract talent and to build up ecosystems, because this is ultimately what we'll need, particularly in Europe, in the current situation. To start off with Marvel Fusion, energy is the foundation of our prosperity, and you're all aware of that. We are on that wonderful Energy Tech Summit. But I want to add one additional perspective on that page, and this is a quote mentioned in the Draghi report, which is saying that if we cannot increase our productivity, we will struggle financing our social systems, and we will need to scale back, if not cut back, all of our ambitions. So energy is critical. What we're seeing here is only the start. We'll have to continue increasing energy availability in order to increase productivity and secure prosperity in Europe. And we are confident that fusion is the one solution that can solve this next to renewables. Fusion technology is safe, it's clean, it's inexhaustible. With 360 kilograms of fuel, we can basically fuel a power plant for a full year. We're talking about 500 megawatts and roughly 8,000 hours a year that we can operate such a power plant. It's flexible, so we're not only producing electricity, we're also producing heat. It can be operated 24/7, and it's highly affordable. We believe with the combination of technology that we're using, it's very thin nanostructure targets, 2 millimeters that we're shooting 10 times a second into a target chamber, combined with laser systems that are from the production side based on semiconductor technology, will reach a highly affordable LCOE somewhere below 550 euros per megawatt hour. Fusion is there, fusion is now. On the science side, there have been incredible breakthroughs the last years. Energy gain has been demonstrated the first time at the National Ignition Facility. It's a laser-driven research facility for fusion. So the question is not, will it happen? The question is when, and what drivers do we need to basically unlock to turn this into a commercially competitive concept? On the right side, we're seeing the market, particularly in Germany. I believe it's the best place currently to build fusion companies. The German upcoming chancellor said he wants to build the first power plant in Germany, and there will be significant funding coming in the coming years. We're seeing very similar tendencies in China, and of course also in the US, where people want to build fusion power plants in the next 10 years. On the technology, and very specifically about Marvel, there's two technology components that are critical. One is those very thin nanostructured targets. This is an actual picture. It's rods that have a height of roughly 20 microns and a diameter of 50 nanometers. 20 years ago, it was not possible to produce them. Today, it's possible. So today, the base for our fusion targets can be produced. And it's laser technology, short pulse diode pump systems that we are developing with partners. 2 Nobel Prizes over the last 5 years have been awarded for those systems, and we're using them to ultimately shoot on targets, to ignite them, to reach fusion energy. What makes us so confident? One, on the laser side, our laser is 20x more efficient than traditional systems because we can mitigate the energy losses inside the laser. 2, on the target side, we have invented the target technology that brings us to a point where we are 100x more efficient than conventional approaches. We have tested it already in existing infrastructure, subscale, and we're seeing the physics drivers that we simulated before also working subscale in existing facilities. And both combined is bringing us to a concept where we believe that we can reach an LCOE of below 50 euro per megawatt hours in the next 10 years. On the timeline, we were able to demonstrate all physics drivers in existing infrastructure. Now we're building our very efficient laser system. It's funded by the German government. We will ship them to the US, where the infrastructure is funded by a university. And afterwards, the next point will be basically building a first power plant where we're working with Siemens Energy. They have invested in our equity, and they are committed to build a first prototype with us in the next 10 years. Recently, and very exciting, we announced our Series B funding round based on the progress over the past years, based on, I would say, long-term relationships and a very detailed due diligence process. We were able to bring in 113 million of new capital. We brought together, I would say, the leading venture capital investors in Europe, Earlybird, HV Capital, and particularly EQT. We combined this with large balance sheets, Siemens Energy and Deutsche Telekom, and particularly with topics like fusion energy, where you need to have government backing. We were also able to attract significant funding from EU level, but also from federal level in Germany. All combined, we are the best funded, the best positioned laser fusion company in the world. We attracted more than 385 million of funding, 250 million public funding, public grants, 170 million in equity. We have more than 70 people from more than 20 nationalities. And of course, it's not a winner-takes-it-all game. We are collaborating with leading players like Siemens Energy, Thales, but also BASF and IMEC, European players, to ultimately make it happen, preferably in Europe. With that, I would welcome Rokas to the stage, and I'm more than happy to run a bit through the climate bricks.
I think no small shoe to fit, you know. To what, 385 million total funding raised. I sort of thought about it when you were presenting, and first of all, congrats on the fundraise. That's very impressive, and I think we need more role models for Europe, building, again, complex companies, and but the ones that make actually a dent and change. It's not again, not dissecting that any other businesses are not hard to build, but you're creating something new. There's a reason why this brick is called new technology. And building new technology in Europe we've been sleeping a bit on new technology, and it's great to have companies like Marble Fusion showing by example. So with that, I wanna use the time and actually to the audience to sort of get in your head. As a CFO, you have a very tough job. Probably CTO has even harder job making this technology work.
Probably.
But as a CFO, and when you go to fundraise from both capital allocators, you probably get a question: when I'm going to see this live? And especially new technology, you're trying to prove something that yet is going to be operational in 2030. So you take that milestone and where you're going to go to actually build your prototype and the first demo plan, and how do you dissect that funding journey? And it's clear that you've been successful. And I know you were one of the first role models for the Climate Brick. How are you using Climate Brick, and how has it been helpful for you to dissect that journey, capital journey towards what you're trying to achieve when you later build first commercial or demo plan?
I believe it really helped a lot, and we are part of that Climate Brick discussion already since a couple of years. There were lots of interviews back then with McKinsey where they asked us about the different, basically, swim lanes or development lanes inside the company and how we are unlocking them, at what stage and at what point we're thinking about also commercialization topic. I believe the key critical part is we're speaking about fusion, we're speaking about a moonshot, right? And the first thing is, how can we basically break this down into the key risk topics of that company? And of course, first and foremost, it's about science. We need to prove the science. We need to prove that the physics drivers that we're talking about that haven't been demonstrated before, they are actually working. The second thing is technology. What are the critical technologies to ultimately scale this up to a fusion power plant? In our case, it's definitely the laser. And how can we kind of create confidence also in our roadmap with partners that we will be at some point able to really produce such a system? And then the third point is, how can we ultimately bring this down to a fusion power plant, right? I mean, this is not a winner-takes-it-all game, it's ultimately a partners game. So we need to find the right partners with the right reputation and the right assets to scale us up with us to a commercial power plant. Then the fourth point comes into place. Who's taking the energy? So where are the potential off-takers that are ultimately supporting us to create an initial off-take structure to support us also to unlock additional capital pockets? And this is where basically Deutsche Telekom came into place. They are very open for that. They're seeing the huge electricity need for data centers. When you think about the US, they currently need 100 terawatt hours of electricity to operate data centers. This will increase to 500 terawatt hours by 2030. We're seeing very similar tendencies in Europe. And Deutsche Telekom, they are recognizing this, and that's why they invested in us, that we can jointly work on a structure that is supporting them also to operate ultimately data centers with baseload fusion power. And then the last lever is, I would say, investors, right? I mean, you cannot bring in strategic investors in your seed round. It doesn't make sense. You need to have knowledgeable deep tech investors that take that risk, that support you to build up basically the company to raise your Series A. And then it's all about, particularly for fusion, to bring in more and more different pockets of capital. When I think about this round, we brought in EQT, HV Capital, Early Bird, and a couple of more venture capital funds as venture capital investors. The second lever is large balance sheets, Deutsche Telekom, Siemens Energy. The third one is government-related funds. EIC Accelerator Program, they're only investing in companies with a TRL of 4 or 5. They invested in us. Sprint, which is the Agency for Disruptive Innovation in Germany, they made their first equity investment overall into Marvel Fusion. Bayern Capital on a regional level. So also there we covered Europe, Germany, Bayern. All the 3 dimensions that we basically need also in order to ultimately build a power plant, such a power plant in Germany. And the last thing is long-term oriented family offices. 2 of the largest 3 family offices of Germany invested in us directly, and they're also open to anchor upcoming funding rounds with significant tickets to really make this happen in Germany.
So maybe a question to dissect that. This is actually honestly phenomenal, purely because you managed to gather so many stakeholders and to find a piece in that sort of capital stack. When you sort of initially started, and again, it's not that long ago, right? Like these companies take decades to build and de-risk. I mean, we have in the climate brick, we don't honestly, we have Series, like Series A, Series B, Series C, and I think investors are basically programmed to think like that. I think in the software business it becomes easy because we go from milestone to milestone trying to achieve growth for the company, and growth means revenue. I think when we're building these new technologies, moonshot bricks, it's very hard because there's no revenue till you actually build and prove the technology to work, and you actually build a project, and that's the only day, and that could be 10 years. Sometimes it could be even longer. In your case, it's going to be 2030s when you're going to build the first demo. And yet in 2024, 25, you have to go and get an offtakes. So when you show investor progress, and especially for different type of capital stack, could you walk through kind of the logic when you went to fundraise, how you thought about it? I think we have this critical unlock that we call in Climate Brick, which is public funding. It's very important to lock in public funding, right? There has to be buy-in from the public institution, the first kind of loss, let's call it, right? Especially for these crazy projects, right? You guys are building something absolutely novel that has not been done. How did you thought about it, and what do you think were kickers? Was it VC signaling when they said yes? Because you obviously had investors before this raise, right? When did family offices came through? Which capital was call it the more easier one, the harder one, that required more? And how do you then, once you had that availability of capital, especially since you raised this new round with EQT and HV and a bunch of other VCs, right? How that changes now the narrative for your further kind of capital stack?
I believe when I think about the fundraising journey of Marvel, Series A and the seed round, in Germany there's lots of grants, and you can of course raise those grants. But back then we were at a level of maybe 50 million grants and roughly 60 million equity. Think about the Series B and think about investors that now came in, HV with their growth fund and EQT with quite a significant ticket. For them it was quite important that there's government backing, right? Because Of course, we will need in total 350 million till end of 2028, and you can, at that stage of that company, not raise that money in Europe from venture capital investors or family offices or strategic investors. So it was quite critical that there's some backing from governments, and preferably that there's even a hedge across countries, right? And based on that, we had very good discussions with the German government. We were able to attract funding for the laser. On the US side, we attracted significant funding from universities, but also the Department of Energy to build the infrastructure to basically test, commission the laser system. And with that, we brought together, before we raised the Series B, an overall public support of 215 million. This brought us into the situation where it was a relatively small amount that we needed on top in order to reach the one significant milestone for us currently, which is testing the laser, demonstrating the laser, and developing the conceptual design of the power plant. Thinking ahead, we are using that same pattern again. We're now seeing a huge interest on the European level, on the level of the government of Germany, to support us way forward, to bring in even equity, to support us with additional funding to accelerate the path to a fusion power plant. And that's what we will then also take as kind of matching facility to attract additional funding, maybe for another Series B extension or even for the Series C round, to reach, and that's the goal, to reach that holy grail milestone energy gain by 2028, and afterwards scale this up to a first fusion power plant.
Do you think using Climate Brick, at least with your stakeholders, help you in kind of articulating your milestones, especially forward-looking, and also reflecting the kind of progress that you've made to get to the point now into the Series B fundraise?
I think it really helps to have like an integrated view on the company, that it's not only about physics or technology or the power plant, that's really also about building the right team, developing the right capital stack of investors, trying to de-risk with government funding, but also thinking about first commercial contracts. Of course, currently we are not having any off-take agreements, but particularly based on the discussions that I had today and the momentum that I'm seeing, particularly with Deutsche Telekom and large-scale industrial players in Germany, there's a huge momentum that we will, of course, use in the next 2-3 years to build first off-takes and maybe bring in some early infrastructure investors in our Series C round. And in that regard, I believe that very structured, integrated approach of seeing a company, of developing a company, really helps us and will also help lots of other companies in different bricks to scale companies successfully.
What do you think was the hardest job as a CFO? The founders always want everything faster, especially when you bring things, right, over-promising and dissecting this sort of timelines. Everyone thinks between rounds is like, 6, 12 months. Everyone measures that in growth. How do you think in the company about these sort of further milestones? If we look at the kind of timeline, right, in 2030, I think you're going to build a pilot plant. Yeah. How do you think about the next milestones? And I think what's cool, especially in Moonshot Brick, you guys are an example, right? Like everything is very dynamic and changes, and I think being able to benchmark is also a huge asset as well, given the brick feeds from real experiences like yours. And even though every climate journey is different for every climate company, but I think you're setting kind of the example. And I think for me, it's interesting how when you go to fundraise, think through 1-year periods, milestones, like Series C, Series D almost letters become irrelevant, right? Yeah. It's the next milestone that you're going to fund it for.
It's not only the milestone, it's also really the momentum. We just closed our Series B and we got approached of lots of investors that are very open and interested to understanding what we're doing and potentially making a bet. So I would not fully exclude that we're potentially doing another extension of our Series B maybe this year, because there's huge momentum in Germany and Europe, but also on the investors' side. Thinking about what makes my job exciting but equally difficult is, of course, people are naturally impatient, right? And I have the strong perspective that, if there's investors coming in, they should also take the time to build confidence in what we're doing, because deep tech is hard. There will be lots of challenges. We've seen lots of deep tech companies being successful, but very often there's challenges that you have to solve, that you have solved jointly with your investors, and it's important that investors build that confidence in that company, in the team, before bringing them on board. So fundraising takes a bit longer, but I believe it's fully okay that takes a bit longer if you have ultimately investors on board that are open to carry you also in upcoming funding rounds. Think about the milestones ahead. We're building our laser. We will test that laser this year. We will reach so-called proof of technology by end of next year, which is the key distinct milestone to afterwards work together with Siemens Energy on building a first power plant. And I believe we have proven that you can raise those amounts in Europe for deep tech, that you can bring in also money from governments to support this, to scale this up in Europe. And I believe we're well positioned to really make this happen. And with additional support from investors, we're really confident that this can be the future of energy for humankind.
Thanks, Nicolas, for this conversation. Again, congratulations on this funding round and honestly putting all the work in building something that is groundbreaking and changing, I think, the direction of European energy transition. Give it a round of applause.
Thank you.